Well, thank you, Paige, and hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Reserve Studies 102, the financial analysis. Numbers speak to me, so after the Reserve Studies component list is completed, whether it's been created for the first time or updated, I like to dive in and see what the numbers actually say. It's impossible to tell from just looking at the component list, so doing the financial analysis brings clarity to the situation, eliminating the mysteries and confusion. By doing some simple calculations, we're able to take that long list of components and turn it into useful information that tells you if your reserve fund is strong or weak and how much you should be contributing. And so in today's webinar, I'll walk you through that process, showing you the magic of how it all comes together. Now for a few housekeeping comments before we get going. As a reminder, this is a live presentation and everyone has been muted to keep the background noise to a minimum. I want to point out a few controls that appear on your screen. I like an interactive presentation, so every once in a while I'll ask for your feedback, and the way to respond is to raise your hand by clicking on the hands raised icon in your control panel that looks like the one you see on the screen. And if you came with a question, or if at any time you have a question that arose due to something I've said, just type it into the dialog box in your control panel, similar to the one that you see on screen. Paige will be monitoring that throughout our session today, and we'll select from those at the end during our Q&A session. I hope you have some paper and are taking notes, but just to give you some peace of mind, I want to let you know that the session today is being recorded and will be uploaded to our website for future reference. We'll create and send an outline for all attendees who fill out a survey at the end of today's session. So without further delay, let's give it a test. Give me a hands raised if you're ready for me to get going on the presentation. Grab your mouse and give me a hands raised. Very, very nice. Paige, we've got a good group with us today. Okay, I'm going to click everyone's hands down and we'll get going. Okay, let's step away from the topic and talk about the big picture. First of all, what are we trying to accomplish? Well, every board member is chartered with the responsibility to protect and maintain the physical and financial assets of the association, and managers assist them in that task. And to accomplish that task, they need a forward-looking document, a document that helps them see the present accurately and helps everyone anticipate and prepare for those major repair and replacement projects too big to be absorbed into the ongoing operational budget. That key document is called a reserve study. Today's webinar is going to show you how some of that great information comes together. And as a reminder, every reserve study has three parts, beginning with the reserve component list, which forms the foundation. That's a stable foundation if it's based on National Reserve Study standards. That's the material that we covered in Reserve Studies 101, which addressed the subject of creating, updating, and for our clients, reviewing the reserve component list. In case you missed it, we've got a recorded version of the Reserve Studies 101 webinar on our website. To see it, you can go to reservestudy.com, select our Learning Center, then the Webinars icon, and there you'll find and be able to watch the Reserve Studies 101 webinar and print out and read the outline. Okay, well, after you have that reserve component list, the second result of a reserve study is the calculation of reserve fund strength, which reveals how well the size of your reserve fund balance matches up against the needs defined by your components. And then comes the calculated reserve funding plan, which reveals how much it costs on an ongoing basis to offset the ongoing deterioration of your components and provide for the timely repair and replacement of your reserve components. But let me point out that what the reserve fund strength and reserve funding plan have in common is that they're both calculated results. And so that's the material we'll be covering here in today's webinar. The good news is that these concepts come from National Reserve Study standards, and so they apply to all associations. Large high-rises, simple neighborhood associations, special application associations like this docominium, and large condominium associations with a long list of components. I mentioned it in passing, but as a reminder, the reserve component list should be based on the National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test that gives it stability. That 4-part test says that to qualify for funding through reserves, the project needs to be one that is a common area maintenance responsibility. It needs to have a limited useful life, a predictable remaining useful life, and it needs to be above a minimum threshold cost of significance. The result is a component list that looks something like this, with a description of each component, its anticipated useful life, remaining useful life, and current cost estimate. This is the simplified reserve component list that I'll be using for today's examples. So, time to jump into the first part of the financial analysis, the calculation of reserve fund strength. Well, this is important because we all need to know how much is enough. Before National Reserve Study standards arrived in 1998, people were using some of these calculations you see on screen to try to measure the size of their reserve fund. You may have heard of some of these, dollars per unit adjusted by age, percent of annual budget, or possibly a percentage of unit value. Unfortunately, none of these were found to give reliable guidance, just like the different opinions that people might have had about their association or your association as far as how much cash the association should have in the reserve fund. It might have been values like 100,000, 500,000, or 5 million for larger associations. What we do need is a reliable measuring system that works for all types of associations, large or small, complicated or simple, and all different construction types. The good news is we found it, and it appears in National Reserve Study standards. So let me talk you through how it works. Let's take a look at that first component, pool furniture replacement. It has a 5-year useful life. Its remaining useful life is 0, meaning it's time to be replaced, and its estimated current replacement cost is $4,600. If you are a board member and it's summertime and you need to get some new pool furniture, how much would you like to see in the reserve fund allocated to pool furniture? If we were all together in the room, I'd have someone in the front row just shout it out because it should be pretty obvious. That's right, $4,600. That's how much you'd like to have in reserves for the pool furniture. Let's do the same thing for the second component, pool resurfacing. It has a 10-year useful life, and its remaining useful life is 5, meaning its life is halfway used up. With a current replacement cost estimate of $10,000, how much do you think would be a good number for an association to have set aside at this time for the pool resurface project? They don't need it now, but it's got a $10,000 current cost. Life is halfway used up. Think about it. Again, your intuition was probably correct. $5,000 is a good amount for the association to have set aside at this time for their pool project. Mathematically, the National Reserve Study standard term for this is called the fully funded balance, and it's simply the fractional age of the component times its current cost. We do this little calculation for each component and sum up the total for the association. The fully funded balance looks like this through the years for that pool resurface project. Over here to the left, when the pool is brand new, it has 0 deterioration and it needs 0 in reserves. As it ages, the fractional age increases until it's fully aged, and the association will need $10,000 at that time to execute the pool replacement project. Then the pool is resurfaced, and then the cycle begins over again. And notice how in the 11th and 12th year, let's say 12th year, the association's fully funded balance is only $2,000. Give me a hands raised if you're following how this works. Hands raised, everybody? Good, 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 good. Okay, most everyone's keeping up. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. Fully funded balance is the fractional age times its replacement cost, and it will go up and down as the individual components cycle through their life expectancies. So we do the same calculation for each component, as you can see, and we calculate the fully funded balance total for the association. At this time, the fully funded balance is $154,100. Each year, the replacement cost estimates change, and the useful life and remaining useful life estimates change, so you can imagine how this fully funded balance figure changes each year. But it's a predictable, moving target. Hang in there because we're just about to get to a breakthrough concept. Now we take the association's actual reserve fund balance, which is typically projected forward to the first day of the fiscal year, and divide that by this fully funded balance number that we just calculated, and we multiply it by 100 to express it as a percentage. This is the kind of stuff that puts a smile on my face because now we've got something good and useful. We've established a relationship between the actual reserves at the association and the reserve deterioration at the association. This is that comparison that we were looking for. Now a board member or manager can make an informed decision. If that particular association that year had about $308,000 in reserves, they know they're 200% funded, meaning they have twice as much reserve cash on hand as they have reserve component deterioration. On the other hand, if they only have about $77,000 at that time in their reserve fund, they know they need to be careful because they're only 50% funded. Their reserves are scarce. They only have about half as much reserve cash on hand as they have deterioration. And this is another way to think of it. Reserve deterioration is ongoing. It's kind of like the pace line you sometimes see when you're watching an important swim race, like during the Olympics. Your reserve component deterioration is ongoing. And if it's outpaced your reserve contributions over the years, you get left behind, which means your association is underfunded. You've got likely some serious catching up to do, or you could possibly face some serious consequences. So the question is, are you on pace? Well, the great thing is this is all measured, as we just found, on a percentage basis. So this measurement of reserve fund strength works for all associations of all types. Being 100% funded means your association is currently on pace, meaning your reserve fund size is equal to the amount of your reserve component deterioration. You're even with the on pace line. And you can note that we've divided the scale into three ranges. Poor, the red 0 to 30% range, fair, the yellow 30 to 70% range, and strong, the green 70 to 130% funded range. Well, in doing over 30,000 reserve studies across the country for all types of associations, we learned a lot about our clients that we can share with you. We found that about 30% of associations are in that green, strong range. About 40% of associations are underfunded, but in the fair, yellow range. And the last 30% of associations are in that red, poor range. So I want to make sure we've learned the lessons from that last chart and let some of the numbers sink in. 70% of all associations are either in the fair or poor range, so they're underfunded. That large number should probably not really surprise anyone. But not all of those are in bad shape. About 30% of all associations across the country are seriously underfunded. Those are the ones making the news. Those are the ones in the most trouble. But it's also very important to realize that 30%, or about 1 in 3, of all associations across the country are well funded. Having a strong reserve fund is not as rare as you might think. I hear far too many people say that no association could ever have a strong reserve fund, like it's an unattainable target. Well, that's just flat out wrong. And why do we consider reserve fund strength important? Here's another great chart. It shows the relationship between special assessments and percent funded. Notice how on the left side of the chart are associations with a poor reserve fund in the 0 to 30% range. Notice that they have a high risk of special assessment in any given year. These are the ones that don't have the money they need in the reserve fund, so they need to special assess. And as you move to the right, in the yellow fair range, special assessments are what you could describe as infrequent. And moving further to the right, special assessments are just plain rare among associations in the green range, the associations that are well funded. This chart's a real eye-opener to boards thinking they can get away with underfunding their reserves, because they can't. Underfunding can be measured, and associations that underfund their reserves face some significant consequences that I'll address in just a moment. The biggest thing that you learn here is that special assessments are not random. Special assessments are very predictable, and they happen to associations that have a weak reserve fund. It's very similar to the risk analysis that you face when selecting your insurance coverage. When you have a low deductible, your insurance policy premiums may cost a little bit more, but because of that low deductible, you have a low risk of any big expense hitting you. On the other hand, when you've chosen a low insurance policy premium that comes with a high deductible, the trade-off is that you have a higher exposure to those surprising big expenses. The same is true with reserves. Slightly higher contributions that strengthen your reserves mean you have a pretty low risk of special assessment. But underfunding your reserves exposes the association to a measurably higher risk of special assessments. So, what are the consequences of underfunding your reserves that I've been implying are worth avoiding? Well, special assessments, those are the big catch-up items that typically just make up for the contributions you didn't make on an ongoing basis. There's deferred maintenance, projects that you delay because you don't have the cash, and those things that you delay begin to make the association look run down, or you lose curb appeal. There's declining home values due to that poor appearance, mortgage difficulties that prospective buyers face when your reserve balance or reserve contributions fall below critical values, and there's increased board member liability. And that's because, after all, it is the board's responsibility to maintain the assets of the association, and if those assets aren't maintained, board members take on some personal liability. So you might ask, if underfunding is so foolish, why are 70% of all associations underfunded? And why are a big 30% of all associations seriously underfunded? How does that happen? Well, that's exactly the topic of another webinar that we've done that's accessible on our website, again, in our Learning Center under our Webinars tab. It's called Underfunding Reserves. If you take a few minutes to watch that webinar, you'll find it addresses the causes, how to prevent underfunding, and how to turn it around at your association. And another good resource is a blog post you can find on our website. It's called the $10 Solution. You might be underfunded now, but your association is not doomed to always be underfunded. In this blog post, we outline a very straightforward way associations can and have changed the trajectory in the future of their association, changing the home values, rising home values in the process. Okay, hands raised, ready for the second half, the funding plan. With me? Got it. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. Here we go. How we calculate reserve funding plans. As you know, this is a key result of every reserve study. It answers the question, how much do we need to contribute? And we find so many times it's what our clients look for first when they crack open a reserve study. Well, for most people, our recommendation sounds like a wheelbarrow full of money. On one hand, that's true to an extent. Everything is expensive nowadays, and it's expensive to keep up with deterioration at these multi-million-dollar community associations we either work with or call home. And it's made a little more difficult when you realize that while the deterioration itself is constant, the expenses are irregular. So the association needs to be prepared in order to absorb the blows of those irregular expenses. You need to get prepared in advance. So that's the problem. The association needs to be well prepared so it can face the problem of irregular expenses with strength when its major income stream is stable. Those stable monthly, quarterly, or annual homeowner assessments that you have on an ongoing basis. All right, before I go any further, I want to make sure that as we start this second half of the webinar, I want to be very clear is that we're going to do a different set of calculations here. We do one set of calculations when calculating reserve fund strength or percent funded, and we'll do some similar appearing but unrelated calculations when we're calculating reserve contributions. Everyone clear on that? Reserve strength calculations are different from reserve funding calculations. Can I get a hands raised? Hands raised on that? Similar appearing but different set of calculations. Okay, great. I'm going to put hands down. Okay, another key concept. I've mentioned it through my talk today if you've been paying real close attention to my words, but it's a point that needs to be emphasized. Are reserve contributions for the here and now or for the future? Ponder it just a moment, and I will tell you that I believe reserve contributions are for the here and now. Deterioration is an ongoing daily, weekly, monthly occurrence. Reserve contributions are necessary to offset that ongoing deterioration. If reserve contributions offset that ongoing deterioration, the future will take care of itself. And the great fringe benefit is that all owners are going to end up paying their fair share along the way while they own a unit at the association. So to make it clear, reserve contributions offset ongoing deterioration. They're not saving for a rainy day. It's as real a bill as any other bill at the association. So your choice of words, choosing present tense words instead of characterizing reserves as a future issue, is going to go a long way towards having more success with reserves at your association. Think about it. People are inherently receptive to understanding the concept of fairness and of paying their own bills. On the other hand, people are naturally inclined to delay or ignore when an issue can be easily deferred to a later time. So don't fight human nature. Whenever you talk about reserve contributions, frame the conversation as a present tense discussion, okay? And along those lines, what is the cost, the ongoing cost of deterioration? Now, typically it's an intermediate figure, not a result that you usually see coming from a reserve study. But let me show you what it is and how it influences your actual funding plan recommendation, that final number that we give you. Here's that same reserve component list that we've been using today. The rate of deterioration, or cost of deterioration, is the cost of each project divided by its useful life, the number of years it's expected to serve. It's pretty easy to see in that second line item, the pool resurface project, where the $10,000 cost is divided over 10 years, meaning the pool surface is currently deteriorating at the rate of $1,000 per year. It's pretty intuitive. So when you do that calculation for all the components and add them together, you get a total reserve component deterioration rate of $20,170 per year for this association. This is the ongoing cost of deterioration at this association at this time. When I spoke to you earlier about that pace line in the swim race, the pace that the swimmers had to keep up with to keep from falling behind, this is the pace of reserve contributions that an association has to maintain in order to keep from falling further behind. And here's what I mean. I'm going to use this chart for the next few slides. I'm going to plot reserve fund strength over time. Time moves from left to right, and as I've indicated earlier, a strong reserve fund is over 70% and is at the green range on the top of your screen, while a weak or severely underfunded reserve fund is in the 0 to 30% funded range and is shown at red in the bottom portion of your screen. I'm going to show where you see the yellow arrow off of the right to help you keep an eye on where the 100% funded level is, okay? Let's see what different reserve contributions rate do for this association. Let's presume a typical association starting at about 50% funded. Let's presume they're making contributions at that $20,170 per year rate, the rate of deterioration that we just calculated for the association. Funding their reserves at that rate is just going to keep up with deterioration. It's not going to cause their reserve fund to get stronger, but it's also not going to cause their reserve fund to drop in strength. They're just keeping pace with the deterioration that's going on at the association. And you can probably guess where I'm going here. If an association makes contributions higher than $20,170 per year, it's going to have the effect of strengthening their reserve fund. The net effect is they're going to catch up a bit, and they're going to see their percent funded gradually increase over the years. Some associations are forced into doing this when their reserves are significantly underfunded, and they need to make up for years of underfunding and prepare for a significant expense or two or three. And there are some other associations that just wish to strengthen their reserves, to move from perhaps the weak range to the fair range or the fair range to the strong range, having the effect of reducing their exposure to the consequences of underfunding. And they do that by contributing higher than their deterioration rate. It's kind of like when you're driving uphill, you need to press the gas pedal a little harder to keep up with things. It's going to take a little more gas to accomplish an uphill trajectory. And here's what happens if you make reserve contributions less than your rate of deterioration. Your reserve fund will drop in strength. Over the years, the association's reserve fund will weaken, and the risk of special assessments, deferred maintenance, and declining property values will increase. They'll increase, those bad things will increase as you go down. Down in reserve fund strength, I should say. Reserve contributions are expensive, but it's far more expensive and troublesome to face the consequences of underfunding reserves. The key is making contributions at your association that are just right. And that means less than too much, but definitely above the not enough range. This is what you learned from your reserve study. Your ongoing cost of deterioration puts you in the right general range, but it needs to be adjusted up or down depending on your starting reserve fund strength, which is your percent funded, and the expenses facing the association in the near future. And of course, the association's risk tolerance for the consequences of reserve underfunding, how unsavory your association finds that. What we find in our experience is that reserve contributions are typically in the range of 15 to 40% of an association's total budget. If we were to strike an average, that reserve contributions are often very close to 25% of an association's total budget. 15 to 40%, you might say, is a pretty wide range, and that's true, but that points out the value of your reserve study. You learn in your reserve study what is just right for your association at this time. And even though I started out this section with a slide showing a wheelbarrow full of money, I want to bring some reality to the subject. While reserve contributions are a lot of money, when you look at it for the entire association, they are very affordable for the individual homeowners. You heard me right. Reserve contributions are very affordable. In all but very rare cases, condominium reserve contributions are just a few dollars a day. For the average condominium owner, adequate reserve contributions are very similar to the cost of a premium coffee drink per day, just a few dollars. If, on the other hand, you're a member of or manage an association where the owners maintain their own standalone homes, then the reserve contributions are even less, and they're truly trivial. For instance, in the planned community where I live, reserve contributions to keep our association fully funded are about 25 cents a day. The bottom line is that properly sized reserve contributions are affordable all across the country. And notice that I stayed away from some National Reserve Study standard words like reserve funding objectives, full funding, threshold funding, and baseline funding. And in addition, I stayed away from discussing different reserve funding plan calculation methodologies and the consequences of those choices. It's helpful to know such things as a board member or manager, but in the scope of this webinar today, I knew I wouldn't have time to develop and explain those topics. So if you're interested in those things, how reserve funding objectives and reserve fund calculation methodologies affect reserve contribution recommendations, that's exactly why you'll want to be following and participating in watching our Resurface 103 webinar that we'll be producing and presenting later on this fall 2015. Well, with the training and our experience here at Association Reserves, we've been back and forth down this reserve calculation and reserve funding trail many times. We've helped thousands of associations understand where they are financially and where to go from here with respect to their reserve contributions. Our job is to provide you with reliable, credible information so as a manager or board member, you can make informed decisions that set your association up for a successful future with the affordable reserve contributions you make this year, next year, and the year after. I've covered a lot of ground today, but I want to leave you with some resources in case you want to do some additional reading. Go to our website, www.resurfacing.com, where you'll find a great library of resources in our Learning Center. Also, you'll find our brand new Quick Easy Quote online proposal request routine for whenever you need a reserve study quote for your association. And if you're not getting our regular email newsletters and invitations to webinars such as this one, by all means, sign up for our email list. So at this time, I'll turn the microphone over to Paige, and Paige, you'll coordinate our Q&A time. Paige?